Hello and a warm welcome to today's webinar, The World of Formula One, featuring Fox Sports Asia presenters Paula Malai, Alex Yoong, if he gets here, and Matthew Marsh. My name is David Kelly and I'm the Executive Director here at the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. Now, for those of you who have been with the Chamber for some time, you will remember that our flagship event around the Singapore Grand Prix each year, our annual F1 networking event, which is usually held trackside at the Singapore Cricket Club. And it's where we have the honour of welcoming some incredible drivers fresh from the track to meet with members and to answer all of your questions. The Formula One Singapore night race has been very much missed from the Singapore events calendar over the past 2 years due to the pandemic. But with the power of webinars firmly in our grasps, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by the three wonderful Fox Sports Asia presenters who will share their stories and answer all of your questions today. We've had some pre-submitted questions from the audience already prior to this interactive session, so please do continue to post your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom, and I'll try my best to answer ththose throughout the session. So with that, I would like to introduce today's guests, and in no particular order, we have Paula Malai, presenter, voiceover artist, entertainment personality and entrepreneur. Paula is an international event professional with over 25 years experience working in TV, radio, theatre, events and voiceovers. And from her beginnings at Channel 5 on as a VJ, she transitioned into sports reporting and for the past 15 years has been presenting Formula One to Asian fans across the region on Fox Sports Asia on both pre and post race shows. Joining Paula today, we have Alex Yoong, Formula One racing driver, presenter, an Audi R8 LMS Cup champion and founder of Access Sports. Alex made history in 2016 by winning a third consecutive Audi R8 LMS Cup championship. And with this accomplishment, Alex has become the most successful Asian racing driver. Alex is the only Malaysian to have raced in the pinnacle of motorsport in Formula One. And during his Formula One career, Alex was teammate to double world champion Fernando Alonso and multiple race winner Mark Webber as well. When not racing at the track, Alex is an expert and host of Fox Sports Race Day program and also represents Malaysia in the Southeast Asian Games in water skiing, where he's won gold and silver medals. And last but absolutely not least, we have Matthew Marsh, Porsche Carrera Cup Asia champion, presenter, founder, and motorsport consultant of EDJ as well. He's a senior executive, a TV personality, an MC, and a racing driver. Matthew's diverse talents have made him a ubiquitous presence in Asian sports and entertainment for 25 years. Matthew is familiar to millions of TV viewers as an insightful analyst on Fox Sports Asia's coverage of the Formula One World Championship, a role that comes naturally after a very successful motor racing career, which saw him crowned Porsche Carrera Cup Asia champion and become the first Hong Kong driver to take part in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Matthew, Alex, Paula, a huge warm welcome to have you. It's great to have you with us today. And I think we've just got a quick video just to see you guys in action before we get going.
2015 marks the 50th year of Singapore as a nation, and the Grand Prix plays a major part in the celebration. So, a new look for 2017's starting grid. No reigning world champion. Instagram or Twitter? Instagram. That makes Mercedes and Petronas have this incredible winning edge over everybody else. You're looking at me like I'm asking the strangest question in the world.
Dropping back a little, I think it's one of those laps that ends up in the history books.
That'll do, I think.
I think we'll look back at this weekend and say this was the day that Charles Leclerc became #1 Ferrari driver. My wife sent me a text message that reads, yes, 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 8 exclamation marks. My man did it, 4 exclamation marks, and 12 smiley faces with love hearts.
No, I think she's got a point. So, you know, happy wife, happy life.
Sure, whatever you like. If he's your favourite, then that's fine.
The only difference being that Matthew Marsh is actually a British Grand Prix winner, isn't that right, Matthew?
Sorry, Annie.
I was going to say, I tell you, this is the beauty of live television. Calm your farm. There are still many more races to go.
Super, guys. Thanks so much for joining us today. It really is great to have you with us. And I guess just to kick things off, just to find out a little bit more about you individually. So, I mean, Alex, if I can start with you. You were the first Malaysian to race in Formula One between 2001 2002, I think, when, in my view, the cars sounded a lot better. Probably not as environmental, but certainly sounded better. But yeah. How challenging was your journey to Formula One? And would you have preferred a bit of a longer stint as a driver versus presenting and being on pundit?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, driving is always going to be the #1 passion, and that's what we enjoy. I could also say the same for Matt, though, as well. Sorry, I just lost you for a second. The other thing is, yeah, it was a long journey, I guess, because coming from Malaysia especially, we don't really have history of motorsports, or a very small history of motorsports. So trying to get from there to Europe and then racing in Japan and all sorts of other places before finally reaching Formula One was a long journey. And but that's just part of the way, you know. We carried on after that, did quite a bit of racing after that. And yeah, it's been quite a varied journey.
Oh, superb. And Paula, turning to you, and again, a very warm welcome. And you started out as a video jockey for Channel 5. And what was the transition to presenting Formula One and rubbing shoulders with some of the biggest stars like for you? How did that take place?
It was dreadful. I'm going to be honest with you. I remember distinctly telling Alex right after I got told that I'd be hosting Formula One, and he was like, Paula, are you kidding? What do you know? And I was like, 0. And I really did struggle because I'd come from being a VJ where it's all about, yeah, what's up? And you got to just be quite a pretty thing and you wear pretty dresses. This is about respecting our audience and learning this new sport. And it really was, you talk about comfort levels and comfort zones. That was me way out. It was awful. I'm surprised they kept the first episode, to be quite honest, but I had these guys that cover me.
Fabulous. And Matthew, thanks for joining us as well. And as Alex mentioned, you know, you're a Porsche Carrera Cup Asia champion. You're an ex-racing driver winning the series in 2004. How did you get involved in motorsport in the first place? And also, what was it like to race at Le Mans? Were there any sort of standout races that you can tell our audience today?
Yeah, I suppose, like a lot of people, my interest in the sport started because of my family. My dad had raced, you know, just for a year or so, but before I was born. But, you know, so there was interest at home, watching television, going to races, and I was exposed to it. And in particular, you know, 1976, which I discovered the other day was the year that Alex was born, funnily enough. You were born, I don't know if you know this, you were born 2 days after the British Grand Prix 76, 20th of July, right?
Yeah,
right?
I think I remember that. Yeah.
Everybody now you know. Alex's birthday, 20th of July. You can send him a birthday card. He accepts all sorts of gifts. Yeah, so that was it. So that was that year. You know, James Hunt, Niki Lauda. It's become famous now. There's that movie Rush, which is not the greatest motorsport movie in the world, but it's okay. And there's a good documentary called Hunt versus Lauda. But that was, you know, I was 7 years of age. What was I not going to fall in love with? And then my grandfather died, funnily enough, and not funny, but if you know what I mean, it happens, doesn't it, right? And it caused my family to move to Hertfordshire because my dad wanted a nice big house, basically. And because of that, I lived in a town where there was a great shop called Grand Prix Models. It was the only model car shop in the UK. And working there, I met all sorts of amazing people in the sport that I just learned an enormous amount. And then when I wanted to try my hand at it, I was surrounded by people that could help. And that's kind of been the story of my motorsport life, really. It's people that can help.
Oh, fabulous. And just turning to F1 broadcasting, you've all sort of wrapped up about 15 years of presenting and analysing Formula One, starting from the days of Star Sports to ESPN and then latterly to Fox Sports. I'm really keen to hear, and I'm sure our audience are as well, sort of what was it really like behind the scenes? And what does a typical race weekend look for you? And how much research do you put in to analysis in your scripts. Is it really as glamorous as it looks? Paula, perhaps if I can start with you.
Well, no, it's not as glamorous as it looks because there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done. And I mean, I'm particularly anal, and because I had so much knowledge to catch up on, just to simply be on par with my pundits was additional work. But what was the question? Wow. Is it as glamorous as it seems? It's it's known in the office that the Formula One post show is the hardest show to do of any of the products we have, whether it's football or anything. And there are lots of people who, like directors and visual who do not want to do it just because it's such a reactive show, the post show. We don't even know how time we're going to see it. So that's all about the pundits, letting that show flow as it flows.
Right.
I mean, just personal views. I found the F1 post show to be much easier than doing anything else like football or tennis. So I don't know anything about football or tennis, so I don't know what you're complaining about.
I'm sharing.
How much do you write in your scripts? A Dickie Bird told me, Paula, that you do a lot of sort of pre-prep events, and there's not an auto cue. A lot of it is a huge amount of research that goes into it, which perhaps we don't see when we're sitting the other side of the screen. And how much preparation do you put into sort of the shows?
Invariably, I will go into the office about 5 hours before our rehearsal. So we always do at least 45 minutes in the studio. By the end of the evening, on a normal European race, we've actually been in that studio for probably about 5 hours. If you consider the 45 minutes rehearsal, 1 hour of our pre-show, then a couple of hours for the Grand Prix, and 30 minutes for the post-show. So it's a really long night. And I remember thinking when I first started, God, I don't have the muscles to do this. I was getting tired and fatigued, and it was like 53 laps, and I don't know what I was doing and talking about. It was hard.
Yeah, Alex, what about yourself? You've been on the glamorous side, getting in the cars. What's it like on the presenting side?
It's interesting, eh? I was kind of lucky because I did Formula One. I got offered the job to be the pundit for the Formula One show. And at the time, there wasn't anyone else from the region that had done Formula One. So it was kind of like my job to have, so to speak. I didn't enjoy it at all. I'm not a TV person. I don't like being in front of the camera at all. And I could actually do very little.
What nonsense is this? That might have been back then. You're great at it now. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm a lot better at it now. But back then, I didn't have to do any research. I just showed up and said whatever I felt like saying. Just because I was the ex-Formula One driver. But as we got on, working with you guys, I really started to appreciate the craft, the passion people put into the show. And I really started to enjoy it. And, it's live TV is its own completely different animal. It's not easy. I think the most fun thing I have about it is working with people like Paula and Matt, because they always crack me up.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah. Do you have any sort of pre-show rituals, any of you? Do you get nervous before you go on screen?
Well, why don't I tell you something? Because you were talking about the glamour side. So I do a lot of preparation because like anything in life, I find the more you prepare, then the more you can be, relaxed and do the thing you didn't prepare for, in a sense, right?
Sure.
It's like I always think that if you're doing anything, the most important part of a presentation is the first line, because you're nervous before you start. And then if you get the first line right, you've got some confidence. And if you get it wrong, the whole thing unravels. And but anyway, that's the boring part. The much more interesting part is when we were on site with Fox in those days. I was at Monaco one year and I was on the Red Bull boat thing. It's not actually a boat, it's a 3-story building. And there's ladies going around with drinks on trays. And there was this, you have to excuse me, I'm not very up to speed. This was a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. It was a bright orange drink in a bowl glass. And it must have been, the race starts at 2 or 3, it would have been, I don't know, it would have been lunchtime. And she said, would you like an Aperol spritz? And I said, oh, sure, yeah, took it and put it down, didn't know what it was. And there was a German TV presenter sitting opposite me, Anna, and she said, are you allowed to drink before you go on air? And I said, drink, what is this? Because it was, bright orange and it's sweet, sticky thing. And she said, it's Aperol, it's got alcohol in it. And I said, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. No one's, my producer's in Singapore, what are they going to do? And I drank it, and then just for fun, as I'd finished it, I slid the glass over to her side of the table, and she kind of recoiled back from the glass in case anybody from her team saw her drinking. So it can be glamorous if you go about it the right way.
Have you guys got a favourite Grand Prix? I mean, Monaco sounds pretty good, doesn't it, Matthew? Was that your favourite one?
No, I would say it's much easier to choose my favourite drink, to be honest. But I would say, I think I said to you earlier, I think if anybody wants to go to a Grand Prix, go to Monza, because you're in Milan. Fantastic restaurants and all that stuff, which is an important part of Formula One, you know, the kind of the periphery, plus you're at an historic racetrack. And yeah, I would choose that probably.
Paula, have you got a favourite Grand Prix?
I mean, I was lucky enough to be able to go to Monaco in my first year, but I couldn't enjoy it enough because I just didn't know enough. Bahrain had an unusual vibe about it, and you just end up in hand up your nose, and it's very odd. But yeah, I stopped going on site quite a while ago because I personally didn't enjoy the paddock. I find it a very intimidating place to be, and I always felt like I was terribly out of place, and I had like this imposter syndrome about it. I was like, no, I don't want to be on site if I don't have to be.
Yeah. I think my favorite is Montreal. I really like Montreal.
Oh yes, you love Canada. Yeah.
Canada is great. They really enjoy the city's just such an interesting city, and it's very, very good vibe there. And yeah, I'd say I like Montreal. Other good places are like Melbourne. Melbourne's a great track to go. Singapore's a great race as well.
Oh, brilliant! No, we certainly miss Singapore. And I've got to mention COVID. We've got to get it out of the way. But clearly a big challenge. And we're all calling from 4 different countries, right? I think we're Malaysia, Brunei, Hong Kong, and Singapore, which is amazing. So completely diverse across ASEAN. Were there challenges this year around broadcasting? I mean, were there technical issues, things that were going right or wrong when you were sort of working across the region?
Well, Paula's got the best stories, I think. She's got a whole book to write on technical difficulties.
Yeah, I was going to say, David, where do we start? Because once COVID had kicked in and we found out, remember, Matthew, it was the Saturday morning that we realized that there was going to be no qualifying or something like that, right? Was it Saturday you walked into the paddock in Melbourne, and then the whole COVID thing meant that we would have no Grand Prix?
Well, actually, I'll tell you what, I'll just interrupt you because you need to get back to your technical difficulties. But I was at the Grand Prix in Melbourne, and it was starting to kick off. It'd be kicking off in Asia and da-da-da. Anyway, the point of the story is that a McLaren team member, I'm not sure it was a mechanic, tested COVID positive, and immediately the McLaren team withdrew from the Grand Prix. And I used to work for Zach Brown, who's the CEO of McLaren. I worked for him for 7 or 8 years, and I know him very well. I know the way he operates, which is to the highest level of professionalism. And it struck me that decision was not made quickly. It was made slowly a week before, as he would have done. He would have gone through it and would have had a flow chart. And I thought, if he's made that decision in a cold, air-conditioned room surrounded by his team, and that's a decision, I need to get the hell out of here because this Grand Prix is not going to happen. And what is going to happen, we don't know. So I got on the phone with the guys back in Singapore and basically said, my recommendation is we've already shot enough interviews that if the race goes ahead, you can do a show. And if the race doesn't go ahead and suddenly people who've been in the paddock are locked in hotel rooms for 2 weeks, who's paying? Actually, I didn't get very far until I said, who's paying? At which point they said, yeah, good idea. Why don't you leave?
Yeah.
No surprise to anybody who's worked for that organization.
Oh, very difficult. Go on, Paula.
It was just dreadful. I don't mean to sound like such a buzzkill, but I was quarantining my bum off. I was in and out of hotel rooms, and the problem would occur when I was back in Brunei because the internet is so pants in a lot of these places. I mean, my connection dropped. I think I have actually post-traumatic, what's that word? Post-stress. Yeah, I mean, and I'm not trying to be glib about this. It actually affected me on a really, really high level. So the point that even till our last Grand Prix, I never came on set virtually feeling comfortable. And let me tell you, David, our final show after 15 years, I had a power outage right as kind of 20 minutes into our pre-show. So Alex and Matthew had to go through this show, which is very well produced. And that's actually got scripts that will set up the package. And I was completely off there. So I set up my phone in my car, use all the car lights. I said, look, can we do this? And Niharika, our producer, said, I don't care how you do this, Paula, but you are going to be on that show. So I'm sitting in my little car with my phone on the steering wheel with a power outage. And I was like, are you kidding me? But then it came on just as the podium ceremony was finishing. But to me, I was like, God does play silly buggers sometimes. No, I mean, don't mean that. But I mean, you do get challenged at the weirdest of times, don't you? And that was my last race.
Wow, having to think on your feet as well. I mean, that doesn't help with any of the nerves. How about you, Alex? Any sort of challenges through the pandemic and having to do everything remotely?
Being muted when you're speaking was one of the key things that you fell into the habit of.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Still not modern technology, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting, yeah, because, you know, I think everyone's had to adapt to working remotely. Yeah, the whole Zoom thing or Google Meets or whatever has been challenging. You know, and trying to upgrade your equipment so you sound good, make sure you've got a good internet connection. But I think it's the same for everyone. And I've actually enjoyed it. You know, it's nice to be home to do these events. You know, although the sad thing for me will always be the fact that I never saw the team again. You know, it's 2 years and we didn't get a chance to say goodbye. And I know when eventually I can travel to Singapore, I will catch up with some of them, but I won't see a lot of them ever again. And you know, in that guise of the group of people working there, I've been going down to what used to be ESPN Star Sports since 2004, I think. And Matt's been doing it when they were in Hong Kong since 1965 or something. So
1895, I think.
1895, right? So yeah, so I will always be a little bit sad that I never got to say goodbye to anyone, see the studio for the last time, because we were there a long time.
Well, let me stop you, because I was on the phone last night, Alex, with Chris Henley. I don't know if you remember, if you even met Chris, but Chris was the producer or floor manager when I first started in '94, and I was chatting to him last night. So my point is, the people that we work with, they're in our universe now, and we will get, you know. Yeah. In fact, I'll tell you the story about Chris, which was I worked with this guy. He's a fantastic ex-BBC guy, young but brilliant. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I was at the Singapore Grand Prix, I think it was. And I looked at this guy and I thought, looks like Chris Henley. And as I walked over towards him, he suddenly went, blah, 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 and he was speaking in Spanish. And I went, whoa, I did a thing where that was close. I almost embarrassed myself with some Spanish TV producer. And then I saw him the next Grand Prix, and I was with him. I said, that guy over there reminds me of Chris Henley, who I used to work with. And at which point he turned around and said, oi, what's going on, to somebody in a very English accent. And I thought, blimey, it is Chris after all. So we've become, we've been reunited and big buddies now.
Oh, brilliant. I think you all did an amazing job over the last 2 years. It's been superb. And just, I guess, turning to Formula One, I'm going to start weaving in some questions that we've had from the audience. Alex, if I can start with you. I mean, you've raced a Formula One car. What is it like? And what was that first feeling when you got the eye on the wheel? Can you describe that to our?
Yeah, I can remember that very distinctly. First time was at Mugello, and I remember pulling out the pits, and it felt like a rocket ship had been strapped to the back of me, pushing me through the air. And I remember when around did the first lap, and I thought, wow, I haven't even touched full throttle here yet. And now try to touch full throttle, doesn't start finish straight. And you just can't keep up with the gear changes. It's going up so fast. Your fingers literally can't move quick enough. And then I realized I still wasn't at full throttle. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. But people always ask me that question, and I always struggle to answer it because they're like, wow, it must feel amazing. But I recognize it's like a rocket ship. It's like nothing I can accurately describe. But I've been a race car driver. I didn't just jump into a Formula One car. I've been a race car driver for several years building up to that. So that's several years of getting knocked about, making mistakes, having success, getting hurt, getting back up. So mentally, you're very prepared for all this. You're never going, holy crap, this is Formula One. You're going, right, how can I go faster? And literally the second lap, I'm like, oh, okay, I can get used to this. And then by the third lap, I'm going, okay, how do I go faster? And oh crap, fourth or fifth lap, the car is really slow. It's not fast enough. And that's really the mentality. It's hard for me to answer that question sometimes because I think people are expecting more of a visceral description.
Let me add an anecdote from when you were doing that stuff. And most photographs of Alex in that period, he's got quite a pained look on his face because the car was terrible. And I met him at Suzuka at the Japanese Grand Prix, and he was looking completely exhausted and quite white-faced. And I said, how's it going? He said, Matt, they've only got one power steering system for the cars, and it's not on mine. And, you know, we're like, and the point of the power systems in Formula One is not a luxury, it's an absolute must-have. So the fact that he didn't have power steering in a car, and he was being compared with a guy like Mark Webber, you know, this is the behind-the-scenes stuff. So I think maybe that adds some color to how difficult it was as a challenge for you.
Yeah, and how much of those behind-the-scenes bits do we not see on TV? I mean, that would never be reported, would it? There must be so much that's going on that we don't see. That you sort of, you know, and you look at the contrast against Valtteri and Lewis, for example. There must be so much stuff happening in the background.
But there's also so much happening outside of the drivers, and that's what I've loved about Netflix. Because for me, the most exciting thing about Formula One, people kept asking about the other drivers, but that wasn't the most exciting about Formula One. It's been working with the engineers, the team manager, the boss. You know, there's so many driven people in Formula One. The paddock is filled with them. Even the media people are driven. You know, so it was really fun to be part of that. And I never really saw it described well until Drive to Survive came along, you know, the Netflix show. And you really got a much deeper insight to the people behind the scenes. And that's really what Formula One is like.
We've actually got a question from the audience from Joe, who asks about the Drive to Survive. How has that been received inside for those inside Formula One? It's obviously given a bigger audience. I know certainly a lot of my peer group have sort of got into Formula One because of that, and it's made quite a complex sport a lot easier to digest. But has it been a good thing for the sport, do you think?
Well, I tell you a story we had at Fox. I can tell all these stories now. It's great. We were having a show. Do you remember this? This was when would it have been? Anyway, 2020, I guess. And there was a big meeting that had to be held because the management wanted to understand why it was that the viewing figures for Formula One had gone up, and also skewing more female, as in a more balanced audience, and younger, which is the holy grail for advertisers. And it was a big meeting. And typically of the organization for which we used to work, the CEO would call a meeting, and he and his number two would then turn up late, basically, for the meeting, which was typical of everything you need to know about that company. But anyway, getting on to the point here, they said, well, what's going on? What's going on? Why do we think this is happening? I said, well, let's look at the changes between last year and this. And one of the changes is that the front wings have been changed quite a lot on the racing car. And the other thing is Netflix, and I suspect it ain't the front wings. And you know, the point made was that it was advertising Formula One to a much wider audience, and in a way that made it much more interesting. And I think we've all got stories, not only the three of us joining you today, but anybody who's a Formula One fan bumps into a friend in the street who says, oh my God, my wife and I started watching Formula One now because of Netflix. And they don't necessarily watch live races. Some do, many do, but some watch it the way they want to watch it, whether it's on social media, whether it's YouTube highlights, but they're now fans of Formula One. And that's a critical point that's changed.
Yeah, really important. And Paula, how aligned is Drive to Survive to what's actually really happening? Is it accurate, or is it sort of dramatized to get viewers involved?
I mean, I definitely think they tweak things for novelty's sake. I mean, I remember doing a game with the McLaren boys, and yeah, you could see the producers kind of whispering a little something, and then you know that they're kind of trying to control some sense of narration. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty much what you see. In fact, Matthew would be the best to answer this because it's been so long since I've been in the paddock, apart from Singapore. But I mean, one name, Gunther Steiner. I mean, nobody knew about this guy, but he stole the show, didn't he, in season 1? And he made my nephew start to watch it. My nephew's just United.
Yeah, if I may just add to that as well. I mean, to say how accurate it is, season 1 was very accurate because you could see the teams didn't know what was going to happen, and they gave them more access. So season 1 was really good, but we're already in season 2, you could see him clamping down because too much was said. And in season 3, already was clamping down even more. You could, I can't even watch season 3 for me personally. I don't want to watch the front teams because the teams at the front trying to control everything, which is fine because it does cause chaos later when they say, you know, what the team bosses said about the drivers and stuff. But I love season 1 because it got close. But if you actually ask for drama, the Piranha Club that is Formula One, the tension and the stuff that goes on behind the scene, it's only catching a small glimpse. It actually gets much more tense and much more brutal in that paddock.
Oh, really, really interesting. And I guess one of the things that it will do is it'll help with the huge technical changes we've got coming next year in the sport as well. There's a huge amount of technical changes for next year, and they change constantly, don't they? I mean, from refueling to noise levels to the halo and safety measures, it's all sort of impacted the sport. There's a question that's sort of come in around those technical bits, which is, if you could change one rule in Formula One, what would it be and why? Which I think is a great question. Paula, if we go to you first, if there's one thing you could change, what would it be?
I really missed refueling. I know that sounds a little bit boring and naff or whatever, but I did think that added another element. I mean, in terms of like the cars and how they sounded, because I was kind of very new to the scene, I didn't have much to compare with, and actually I really don't like loud noises, so worked out quite nicely for me.
Matthew, how about yourself as an ex-racing driver?
Actually, I think the thing that I think the evolution of Formula I don't like is the reduction on testing, because in the days of people like Damon Hill, Damon Hill would never have become world champion if he couldn't have become a test driver first. He wasn't going to make it, and he got to go as a test driver because they needed competent people, competent only, to drive. And then the engineers said, wow, this guy's actually really good. He's doing the same lap times as our number one driver, and he's got really good technical feedback. And that doesn't happen now. What the consequence of that is that people like a Kimi Räikkönen, with all due respect to Kimi, remain in the sport for, I was going to say years, but decades in his case, beyond when they should have done. Because if you're a team boss, you're saying, well, if I took Guan Yu Zhou is a perfect example, or Oscar Piastri. If I take Oscar Piastri next year, which is what would have happened in the past, because Oscar would have done 5,000 kilometers in F1 testing. Yeah. They just don't do it. So the old guys stay around for too long, and the new guys often don't get a chance. And if they don't get a chance straight away from when they were winning in Formula 2, they get forgotten, and there's only 20 spaces in F1. So I should say that Formula 1 is addressing this. I think they're moving towards a situation in the future, whether it's next year or later, where in free practice, one of the free practices, you'll have to be running a young driver. And that is a really great change if it comes through.
Oh, that's great. I'll come on to a question that's coming from the audience about that as well. Alex, what about yourself?
Equality, I guess. The problem with, Formula One, the way the system is, and I don't have a quick answer for this, especially, it's two things really. It's the fact that the big teams get rewarded so well. So if you keep on winning, it's really hard. They get more exposure, they get more TV time, they get more prize money. So it's easier for them to stay at the front. So you don't really get a chance to see the guys. You don't see multiple winners. You don't see a Leicester City, for example, in English Premier League winning a championship. That would never happen. But the main gripe, I think, would be about the overtaking. And I actually think that, if you'd caught me 3 years ago, that'd have been my main one, because the problem of overtaking has been there for about 25 years now, and the FIA and the FOM have been very slow to address it. However, I feel they have addressed it now, and I think the regulations for 2022 should encourage that. And while it sounds like I'm complaining, I do feel that they're making the right steps now to correct all these things, including stuff like a cost cap for the teams.
Alex, can you debunk that for us? Because you hear Lewis on the radio and people complaining about getting too close, and they can't overtake and the tyres are overheating. I mean, why is it difficult to overtake in Formula One? That sounds like a really technical question, but why is it?
It's very hard to explain. Yeah, it's very hard to explain unless you've driven a downforce car how much the dirty air influences the car, and it happens even in Formula 3. You can't follow someone closely. So in my day already, you couldn't follow someone closely, and it was really hard to overtake. And it's much worse now. Every year they did these new updates and these new regulations, and it was always catered for the aerodynamists. They love to go in the wind tunnel and play around with it a lot more. And because the big teams had the advantage in those areas, that's why they pushed it in that direction. And it was very hard to bring it back. And like I said, for 25 years, the racing has suffered. It's not like it's MotoGP. It's not like it's IndyCar, where the racing is much more exciting. And finally, they've had some lip service here and there, but it really doesn't do anything. But it sounds like 2022 would be a decent step forward. In my view, it's still not far enough. I think they could actually do it chopping off those front wings. If they chopped off the front wings, you would actually be able to follow the car in front, because you wouldn't be dependent on those wings to push the car to the ground, and they wouldn't get in the dirty air. but it does make a big difference. It's really difficult to drive once you get into the dirty wash. But yeah, next year will be better, and I hope they will keep pushing that, because F1 is the pinnacle, and we should have the best races, but the best races should be like this all the time. It should be like MotoGP and not processions like we saw in Mexico.
I mean, to add some colour to that, numbers to that, as I understand it, at the moment, when a car is within 3 car lengths of the car ahead of it, it's losing 40% of the downforce from this, because of the way the air is turbulent from the car ahead. And the aim is that next year it would be 5% loss, which is obviously dramatic. Now, whether that can actually be achieved in reality is more difficult to predict, but certainly, it's, as Alex says, they're focusing on it now.
Oh, super. And Matthew, Alex, if we're going to stay with you in just a quick second, there's a great question, or 2 questions that have come in here. So with the regulations that are hopefully going to sort of shuffle the pack and make it more competitive next year, cars and engines aside, who in your opinion is the most highly skilled and technically gifted driver on the circuit today? And if you could partner with anyone as your teammate, who would it be and why? Both past and present drivers as well, is the question.
So the most highly skilled on the grid was the first one, right?
Yeah.
I think Lewis. And the data supports my point, doesn't it? And I think there's not much more to say, really. You know, just constantly improving. Never looks, to me, observing him as I've been able to do, you know, relatively close, either interviewing or just further back, just watching him, never looks comfortable as a person, never looks comfortable other than when he's driving the race car, when he looks completely at ease, which I think there's a link between those 2 things. So that's the first point for me. And I'm being slightly glib, but I'm not really. My favorite teammate was Alex, obviously. And Alex and I have raced, because I followed Alex as a TV broadcaster before, and then he got into Formula One. That was great. My mate, or my guy I know, wasn't really a mate at that point, was in that Formula One. And then later on, I happened to race with him, and we did a couple of races together, and we won one, which was it was the first time Audi had won an international sports car race in China. That was in, whenever that was, Alex, that Asian Le Mans Series racing. But it was the perfect driver lineup, because we had Marchi Lee from Hong Kong, Alex Yoong from Malaysia, and myself. And each had their own part to play. Marchi had found the money, and Marchi knew the guy who had loads of money to pay for it all to happen. And Alex was the professional racing driver who knew what we needed in the car and could do the qualifying lap and basically make sure the racing was done properly. And my job was kind of I was a chairman, but my job was to manage the conversation. And so Marchi, for example, the Audi guy said to Alex, you need to slow down in qualifying, because if we go too fast, we're going to get ballast on our car and we're going to get penalized. And I said to the team, no, because Marchi's absolutely right. The sponsor's going to be at the start of the race. He's not going to be at the end of the race. It's 6 hours long. If he sees his car on the pole, we get money to go racing in the future. He doesn't care about the regulation changes. He doesn't care if we get penalized and we don't go forward. So we went and got pole, we got penalized, and we won anyway. But the point was, it was like any good team. It was like taking the strengths of the individuals. And it's very rare you get 3 guys together who know each other's strengths, trust them, and work together. So that was my favorite.
Yeah, that was fun. That was 2011. We had a really good time there, didn't we, Matt?
Try and do it again.
I'm going to go slightly different. I actually think Verstappen is a bit better now. Not better. I mean, right now, and this is where it's going to be fun, because we've had a great year this year. I think Verstappen has shown he can take on Hamilton. Really has. Is he better than Hamilton? I really can't say. But I think next year is going to be interesting. Completely different car change. Hamilton is still at the peak of his powers, so it's great that Verstappen is there. But it's a completely different car changer, and it'd be interesting to see whether Hamilton can still produce the hunger as he has every year since he's been in Formula One. If he can still produce the goods to adapt to the new car and be quick, because you can guarantee Verstappen's going to be on it, all over it like a rash. And if Hamilton can still win with Verstappen next year, that'd be super impressive. That, for me, will cement Hamilton's greatness.
Oh, excellent.
Not 8 championships and whatever it is, 4,000 victories and 72 million fastest laps.
I'll give you a good example, Matt. Whenever Fox says, okay, can you tell us your favorite Hamilton race, this race? I would go, okay, 2012 McLaren victory in the wet. Or I'll go 2007 Canada, or 2007 Canada. You did this as well, because we don't mention the Mercedes races because he deserved that success, but he was a dominant car for so many years. And you can never tell greatness in that. That means nothing for greatness when you're in such a dominant car. But we remember the McLaren years. Remember what he did in some of those races. Like, no, he's just good. And now he is, he's up against Red Bull, which is arguably slightly quicker than the Mercedes, and he's still producing good. It's years like this which show a driver its greatness. It's a bit like Schumacher years. Schumacher really only proved his greatness in those difficult years when he was first with Ferrari. Some of those wins he had in an uncompetitive Ferrari, that was when he kind of went, "Oh, that's a bit special." So. Yeah.
Super.
You're supposed to say that I'm the favourite guy to be the teammate with, by the way. That's the next
of course. Yes, sorry. So I forgot about the second question. My favourite driver. I love you, mate. I always enjoy racing with you.
Super. And guys, you must all see, I think just coming back to the Drive to Survive, I think there was a whole episode on Grosjean's accident in Bahrain, I think, which was quite shocking to see on TV. There's a great question that's coming here around how do you compose yourselves when you see an accident like that, especially when it's live? Is it really hard to sort of control your emotions when you're broadcasting? Paula, perhaps if I can turn to you first.
I would really like to pick on Jules Bianchi, because I remember so clearly when the accident happened and Alex was next to me. He said, "Okay, Paul," he said, "I don't think this is looking good. You've got to really find the right pitch and the right tone." He said, "Because I don't think we're gonna have a good outcome." So I was shaken up, and I was frightened for him, and also because even though we're doing a TV show, you're still a human watching another human in a dreadful accident. But I will never forget Alex's words when he said, "Just try to find the right tone," and it was awful. But we know, and the drivers themselves know that anything can happen, but it's just. Well, I don't ever want to see a race at Suzuka again, to be quite honest with you. But it's just those moments, and then of course, Felipe Massa, the whole helmet thing. I mean, that was just so random and weird, but what an awful outcome it was, So, yeah, those days are just
difficult. And Matthew, Alex, as racing drivers, you might have a slightly different emotion because you're probably been in the shoes of someone that's had a sort of an accident as well. How do you feel and sort of present yourself when you see something like that?
Well, it's interesting hearing Paula tell that story about having Alex with her, because the first season I did with Star was 94, as I mentioned. I think it was, what was that? Third race was when Ayrton Senna was killed. And exactly like Alex did, I knew immediately from just looking at the body language of the people, this was not a good situation. And it's difficult to point out what it is. And I remember being told by somebody a long time ago that when you see somebody run in the pit lane, I mean, I'll go back a bit. When I first started doing any kind of work in media, it was as a commentator at Brands Hatch. When basically I saw the commentator and said, "Oh, Brian, I'm a big fan of yours." And he said, "Well, come up to the commentary booth and do some speaking." So up I went, and he taught me just talk about what you see. So I was always observing, and somebody made that point. If you see somebody running and you don't actually necessarily see it consciously, you're just aware something's wrong. And in the Ayrton Senna situation, the people basically stop working on the car. When people back off a little bit, that's a bad sign. We're very fortunate now, of course, that those that, and it's like life in general, but specifically in motorsport, that the people that have perished in the past, in a way, they paid for the future. And I mean that in road accidents. People didn't used to wear seatbelts. It seems incredible now, right? And some don't take vaccines. That's a whole other story. But in this situation, we're very fortunate, and it's very difficult now. It's not very difficult, but it's still, you're going at 300 kilometers an hour. And if you stop quickly, that's going to be bad. So the biggest risk is complacency. And that's the thing the FIA is really good at, I think, is that Grosjean accident. I don't know if you saw it. A report came out about a week or 2 weeks later where they've broken every detail down. Incredibly meticulous. And that will have changed barrier design. It will have changed the halo, probably materials, all sorts of things. So it's really good.
Yeah, very lucky. Anything to add there?
Sorry, I was just going to add, yeah, I think I can remember twice when I remember being in the car feeling very disturbed. I think one was an A1 GP race. Someone had crashed in turn 1 and we'd seen him go over. And of course, safety cars came over, but we went over because as a driver, you know exactly what sort of impacts are bad and what aren't, because we know it's the sudden decelerations. The ones where they pitch in the air and spin around, those are fine because that's dissipating energy easy. So I see that happen quite often. You're just like, that's fine. but you know the big ones. You already know, you know the big ones. Sudden impacts. Okay, that's going to be about 70 G, and that's maybe not survivable. So I remember seeing that happen in a race when I was driving, and the roll hook come off, and I couldn't see the helmet, so I thought, oh, he's dead. And I remember that was tough because we didn't know at the point, and we were just safety car, and we just had to go. But you do get a feeling in the pit of your stomach, because as a driver, you unconsciously, it's not really conscious, but you unconsciously sheath yourself for the protection, you know, where you don't think anything's going to happen, and you don't even care. You know, it's just sort of like not really concerned about life so sort of much. You're more concerned about being fast. The being slow is much more terrifying than being hurting yourself.
Good answer.
But sometimes that sheath disappears for a bit, and then you feel it. Oh crap! How am I going to get back into that frame? So that was one situation. But I remember another situation which wouldn't actually relate to driving, and that was 9/11. Because 9/11 had happened, and Zanardi had lost his legs the week before as well. So that was a really weird week. Zanardi lost his legs, 9/11 happened, and Monza was happening that weekend. And I remember none of the drivers wanted to drive. I remember that famous conversation, Matt. You know, I remember Michael Schumacher and driver saying, no, don't want to drive. Let's just go to the first race to the first corner, and just don't race to the first corner, just go in the procession. And I remember there was one driver that said, no, we have to race. No matter what, we have to race. People paid hard money for this, and we have to race. And it's a driver I never agree with. And I didn't agree with in that moment, but he was absolutely right. Absolutely right. And that was Jack Villeneuve. You know?
Yeah. He's often been proved right later on.
Yeah. He's
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we've got loads of questions. So I'm not really sure we're probably not going to get through all of these. So, I know Maxwell's put his question. It's been there for a bit of a while. So just going back to broadcasting, he asks, there's been declining viewer numbers for Formula One due to the move to pay TV. Do we think F1 needs to rethink how it gets broadcast? Paula, perhaps I can sort of turn to you on that one.
Actually, I think Matthew, who was just sneezing, I've never seen anyone sneeze live on a TV show or in a seminar. But there you go. I actually think, David, you'll get a lot more juice from Matthew.
Another first by Matthew Marsh, sneezing on, because I'm telling you, my building's being renovated, so it's all dusty. I'm going to be boring. You're going to sound like I'm on message with Formula One, and I am just pro Formula One the way they're going about it. It's a premium product, Formula One, and it's like any global sport. Like, you know, NFL, NBA, whatever it is, essentially the TV rights is part of the ticket money that we pay to go to the event, just like a theatre or a cinema. And the money goes to essentially to the teams and the athletes. And in the future, what's going to happen, hopefully with the cost cap situation, is it'll be a sustainable sport. And a bit like the EPL now, the sponsorship money is helpful, but it's not the absolutely critical part of going motor racing or doing the activity. So it's very important to maintain the money from TV. If it's broadly available to everybody, and the broadcasters aren't paying for that, then it's a problem. Pay TV works with a high quality product. What they've done in the UK is a good model, because the UK is very advanced in terms of watching Formula One. Sky TV is expensive product, expensive subscription, but it's 24/7, great content, live, everything's super live. Formula 2, Formula 3, IndyCar, everything. So if you're a fan, that's great. If you're a casual viewer, you can watch some of the races delayed, I think it is on Channel 4. If you're a casual fan and you're just interested, you can watch highlights now on YouTube provided by Formula One. And if you're a hyper fan and you're not in the UK, you can now, and I'll come to the bad side in a second, you can get F1 TV, which is the, you know, over-the-top streaming service. The problem comes in regions like Asia now, where because of historically Fox had the rights to every part of the situation, and now they've gone and the local broadcasters have picked up the rights for the race. What you're all experiencing if you're in this region is, I don't know what it is, 10 minutes to the race, the feed comes on 5 minutes before, you get the Sky commentary that has to be purchased separately. There's no pre-game, no post-race show. And that's a problem for people that want to have, you know, that sort of content. So that's what I've been doing recently, and Alex has been helping me out with that and coming on the show and being the interesting voice on the show, adding his views, because we think there's a demand for that. And it's a learning process, but yeah, that's the bit that needs to be filled in Asia, so people understand the behind the scenes part.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Matthew. Paula, perhaps I can sort of come to you with this question, which is, what is the hardest race to watch or present? Have there been some really boring ones where you think, oh, God, how are we going to cover some time on this? Or
loads. Well, like, and Matthew, Alex will normally be like, okay, that's when something exciting could have happened. Paul set himself in for a really boring 49 laps. And yeah,
red flags.
What?
You love red flags.
Oh God, I tell you, there's this
Canadian Grand Prix
about red flags, because it happened, I think, in my inaugural year, 2007, and it was all about filling. And I just really did not know enough to get through a minute without my producer having to spoon feed me. I mean, fortunately, I would say with so many red flags this season, we got pretty good at them, didn't we, guys? We kind of knew something was going to go wrong, or that it would be a wet race. Because really, I mean, I think they've only got 4 seasons, only got 4 races left, but I think nearly every race we've had this season that we covered was either wet or had red flaggage. That was, but yeah, Alex is right. It's like the red flags come out, and I was like, oh God. So yeah, some are really super boring, and then we've got to try and polish a turd. You know what I'm saying? You know, make that sound kind of a.
Sorry, I have to say this Mercedes domination has been really tough to call. You know, every year, because we know in preseason testing what the year is going to happen. And I remember 2016 is like, okay, still interesting, Rosberg, Hamilton. Okay, 2017, okay, another year of Mercedes domination. And then 2018, you see you know, in the preseason testing, and just kind of like, we've got to try and make this championship exciting for the whole year. And you know who's going to win. And you know what I mean? And that's preseason testing. And we had like 4 years of that where you just knew. And oh God, thankfully this year has been a lot more fun.
It was painful. It was awfully painful.
Good stuff. Alex, we've got a question here around, it would be great to see more drivers emerging from this region. What can be done to support our young drivers and more at a grassroots level?
And this is a long answer, dude.
And it starts with you, though, Alex. What the driver coaching.
Okay, we're trying to make it more accessible, because motorsports is unreachable for most people in this region. We just don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the tracks. We don't have the teams. So it's just impossible to start here. So if you want to be Formula One, very easy. Give me 8 million euros and I'll plant him in Italy or Germany for the next 10 years. And make sure you give me a kid that's between 8 to 12. And of course, just by the way, the family has to move with the kid, because we can't have an 8-year-old flying around by himself. We need the family there to support him, because you need that sort of support. So it's very hard, and it's very out of reach for most people. We're trying to change things around. We have the virtual world, we've got the simulators, we are coaching people on sims, and they're actually kicking ass. Sorry.
You can say it. They're not on that network.
Not a live broadcast,
is it? You can. So we get our drivers up to a really high level in the virtual world, and they're beating, the Europeans. So that seems to be a way we can do that, where we can actually get real drivers in the virtual world, and they do make the transition to the real world. That's really Asia's only hope at the moment. You need a combination of trying to get your kids into karting, because the karting scenes in Asia isn't that bad. It's a nice way to get in, but you need the virtual world at the moment, because if you want to stay here and get into motor racing, the virtual world is the only way.
Oh, super. Thank you. That's it's really interesting. I'm going to try and merge 2 questions here, just to keep this sort of rolling, because we're rapidly running out of time. We've got so many great questions, which is a real shame. So first question is, who's going to win this year, Lewis or Max? And the second is, when do we think Lewis is going to retire? Paula, perhaps if I can start with you.
It's looking pretty good for Max, isn't it? And you certainly do see Lewis on the back foot a lot. Well, I actually haven't seen a race since we stopped. What was the second question?
Who's going to win this year, and when do we think Lewis is going to retire?
Oh, I always said that Lewis will retire when I retire. So in theory, it's the end of this year.
Matthew?
It's got to be Max, hopefully.
I think that, well, we keep talking about the form book and throwing it out the window. I don't think you can call it. I think it'll be decided by something peripheral this year, as in it'll be an engine problem, or somebody trips over somebody, or it'll be the teammates that help by getting in the way getting in between, causing a delta in points. So I don't think it's going to be. Of course, Max, as you said, Paula, he's ahead at the moment. But wow, we were talking about tracks and Saudi Arabia coming up. Looks like a Mercedes track. And Alex said the other day on our show, Ferrari, you think might be good at Saudi. That was a great call, actually. So as for Lewis retiring, I don't think there's any signal. There's no sign. How old is he now? 36, right? Maybe when he's 40. Yeah.
Another couple of seasons. Alex?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Lewis has always been about being the greatest ever. Out of any other driver from the beginning to now, I've never seen a driver more focused on reaching that goal. Everything he's done towards that. And he's going to try and squeeze everything he can out of it. And to be honest, why not? He's enjoying what he's driving. He's looking more relaxed than ever. He's driving better than ever. Easily he could go for another 4 years. As long as the interest to try and be the greatest ever is still there, he'll keep doing it. And it doesn't just shut off. Doesn't just shut off with a man like this.
Super. Oh, look, thanks so much for all of your time. I guess one last question really is, what are you going to do next? What's next in store for the team? What are your individual plans? Alex, perhaps if we can start with you.
I'm going to go coaching some simulators right after this.
Brilliant.
We are just focusing on coaching and getting more drivers into the sport. And the esport world, that's where we can, that's where we can make a difference at the moment.
Fabulous. Thanks, Alex. What about yourself, Matthew?
Well, my day job has been on the commercial side of the sport for a long time. It was out of necessity because when I was racing, I wasn't very good. So I needed lots of money to, unlike Alex, I couldn't get drives on merit. I had to have the cashola to go with it. So I've always been about sponsorship and I now work to bring brands into Formula One and other forms of motorsport. And on the TV side, I mentioned, we started the new show. It's a learning process. We've got some good views. We do an audio show, like a live podcast. The one last night was great with Alex and Trevor Carlin, a team owner, and Chris Medland, a journalist. We had fantastic questions from people all around the world. It's really, and I was. This is again proof of learning by getting things wrong. I thought that was radio podcast. Blimey, who wants to do that? And it's really interesting. So it's a lesson in try things and learn from them. So long way to go.
Super. Thanks, Matthew. And Paula, last word from you. What's in store for you?
I just started production on the Paula Malai show yesterday. So I've been commissioned by Sarawak and Astro to provide them with a few episodes. And in fact, I'll be doing a Zoom with Alex tomorrow. We had a gentleman called Prince Hakim. And because the thing is, I'm basing it in Brunei, and I really want to get rid of some of these narratives around this, either about, Sharia law, but there are lots of cool people that got nothing to do with Sharia law or certain individuals. And no, not everyone's a billionaire and not everyone is what everyone thinks. So I'm just kind of sharing the heartbeat. I know you're running out of time. It's an awful feeling, isn't it, David? I'm just trying to share the heartbeat of Brunei through my new show.
Where can we find it? Will we be able to find it? When? How? Where?
Well, Alice can watch it on Astro, and I think eventually they'll probably put it online.
Because Maxwell Davis is concerned about things going behind a paywall. So is he going to be having to up in arms about the Paula Malai show not being available free to air? I think we should know. I think you should address this problem.
I'll have a think about it. I'll get my people to talk to your people, Matthew.
Perfect. If you wouldn't mind, yeah.
Thank you so much, Paula, Alex, Matthew, for joining us today and sharing your stories. It's been really, really brilliant to have you. I appreciate we've sort of run a little bit over time, but thank you. We've had so many great questions from the audience, so thank you for joining us as well. Just really, really quickly before we go, just to highlight a couple of the Chamber's fantastic webinars coming up, which you can see on the screen now. You'll receive a bit of a feedback form from today, so please do fill that in, and just helps us to understand from a Chamber perspective what you like and what you want to hear more of. So that really leads me to say a final thank you. It's been great to have the three of you. It's been great to hear some of your stories and some of your predictions of who's going to win, and some of the feelings of what it's like to broadcast as well. It's been absolutely fabulous, and a great whistle-stop tour in terms of a brilliant 15 years. We will miss you on screen. I'll certainly miss you on screen, and thank you for everything that you've done and for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.